In September, we announced the first group, the first tranche of these projects that we referred to the Major Projects Office for accelerated deployment. On top of that list is the new Darlington project, nuclear project. Canada's new government is putting forward $2 billion to build new clean energy technology, the first of its kind in Canada.
Canada is on its way to becoming an energy superpower, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. East of Toronto, at the Darlington nuclear site, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford stood side by side to announce what they called a turning point in Canada's industrial story. The two leaders unveiled a massive plan, 4 new small modular reactors, or SMRs, backed by $2 billion from the federal government and another $1 billion from Ontario's Building Ontario Fund. The Darlington project will be the first of its kind in the G7 and Canada's boldest step yet into next-generation nuclear power. By placing it in the major projects category, Ottawa and Queen's Park can speed up regulatory approvals and construction, trimming years off the normal process. What looks like a regional energy project is, in reality, a national industrial strategy. It is designed to protect Canadian supply chains, secure energy independence, and rebuild high-value jobs that have been squeezed by America's aggressive trade policy. While Washington leans on tariffs to pull production south, Canada is betting on reactors to keep its industries alive at home. The Darlington SMR plan marks the start of a new era for Canadian energy. The reactors will use GE Hitachi's BWRX-300 technology, a compact modular design that produces about 300 megawatts each, roughly one-third the output of a conventional nuclear plant, but built at a fraction of the cost and time. The site east of Toronto is already being prepared by Ontario Power Generation, OPG, which operates the existing Darlington station. According to OPG's project filings in 2025, construction will support as many as 18,000 jobs across Ontario and generate around $500 million in local economic activity every year once the 4 units are running. For Carney and Ford, this is not just about electricity, it is about building an industrial base that can resist external shocks. Nuclear energy provides stable, emission-free power that manufacturers, data centers, and transport networks will depend on for decades. Carney called it a foundation for Canada's next industrial century, emphasizing that homegrown energy is key to long-term competitiveness. By declaring the reactors a major project, Ottawa cut the average approval time by nearly 40%, allowing groundwork to start immediately. The move signals a shift from bureaucracy to execution, a practical, business-like approach to nation-building. For Ford, whose province remains Canada's manufacturing hub, the stakes are high. Ontario's economy has lost thousands of auto and steel jobs as global supply chains shifted under U.S. tariffs. The SMR investment promises to restore confidence that Ontario can once again anchor heavy industry with reliable, affordable power made in Canada.
Canada's first SMR is being built east of Toronto with plans in place to build 3 more units at that same site, and it could serve as a blueprint for Alberta.
The impact of Darlington's announcement didn't stop at Ontario's borders. It sparked a wave of interest across the country, and Alberta was quick to answer. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith revealed that her province would begin public consultations on adding nuclear power to its energy mix. Alberta has long depended on natural gas to supply electricity, but the Premier said small modular reactors could offer a cleaner and more reliable base load, especially for the province's massive oil sand operations. The model she pointed to was Darlington. The 4 SMRs being built east of Toronto are now the blueprint for Canada's nuclear future, a modular system that can be replicated province by province. Smith noted that SMRs can be prefabricated and shipped to site, cutting both costs and construction risk. The technology's scalability is what makes it attractive. Each 300-megawatt reactor can power roughly 300,000 homes, and multiple units can be combined for larger grids. For Alberta, this isn't just an energy decision, it's an industrial one. The province aims to attract nuclear-related manufacturing, engineering, and maintenance jobs, the kind that sustain long-term regional growth. By aligning with Ontario's lead, Alberta joins a growing national shift toward nuclear collaboration, signaling that Canada's path to energy independence is no longer an Ontario story, but a pan-Canadian transformation. Together, the two provinces represent opposite poles of the country's energy landscape, one rooted in manufacturing, the other in hydrocarbons, now united by a common goal: to make Canada self-reliant in power generation and industrial security.
South of the border, the news from Ontario came as a surprise. The Trump administration has spent 2025 doubling down on tariffs that were meant to pull investment back to American soil. By targeting Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos with 25% duties, Washington hoped to weaken its northern neighbor's competitiveness. But instead of retreating, Canada moved in the opposite direction. Tariffs that were meant to hurt have forced Canada to reinvent itself. The Darlington SMR plan is the clearest example of that, a project born from pressure, financed through national funds, and built entirely within Canada's borders. Economists at PwC Canada noted in September 2025 that federal energy investments now account for over 3% of GDP, the highest in 2 decades. Much of this growth is driven by infrastructure spending linked to the nuclear sector. In other words, Trump's economic squeeze has pushed Canada to reindustrialize faster than expected. The irony is hard to ignore. As U.S. companies lobby for tax breaks to offset rising import costs, Canadian firms are finding stability in government-backed energy and construction contracts. While Trump's tariffs raised prices in American factories, they also made Canada's domestic production more attractive to global investors seeking predictable energy costs. The political contrast is striking. Trump's strategy relies on confrontation. Carney's relies on capacity. One weaponizes tariffs, the other builds reactors. The outcome is clear. As the U.S. turns inward, Canada is scaling up. From Darlington to Alberta, a pattern is emerging. Canada is transforming from a supplier of raw materials to a producer of advanced energy infrastructure. Nuclear power, once a cautious experiment, has become a central pillar of the country's economic identity. The numbers tell the story. According to Ontario Power Generation's 2025 update, every billion US dollars invested in SMR development supports roughly 6,000 direct and indirect jobs. The Darlington cluster alone could generate over $2 billion in tax revenue over the next decade. These figures are driving new training programs, research partnerships, and supply chain investments across the country. The Alberta consultations show that momentum is spreading. Provinces are no longer waiting for federal incentives. They're competing to host the next wave of nuclear manufacturing. For the United States, this shift carries strategic consequences. By insulating its economy with tariffs, Washington may have triggered a new competitor next door, one that combines clean energy leadership with industrial stability. Canada's nuclear build-out gives it something every modern economy craves: dependable, affordable power in a volatile world. What began as a $3 billion investment east of Toronto is now a national mission. Factories, universities, and provincial governments are aligning around the same idea, that Canada's strength lies not in chasing America's policies, but in charting its own. In that sense, the reactors rising at Darlington are more than concrete and steel. They are a declaration of independence. Trump wanted to make America dominant again, but in doing so, he may have created his toughest rival yet, an energy superpower being built quietly just across the border.
I think he's a great prime minister. I mean, he could represent me anytime. I will tell you, I'm not saying that because he is a very strong, very good leader.
In Washington, the cameras captured another handshake, another round of smiles inside the Oval Office. President Donald Trump praised his guest, Prime Minister Mark Carney, and the two leaders spoke of friendship and trade. But behind those polite gestures, the stakes could not be higher. For months, Trump's tariffs have tested the economic bond between the United States and Canada. What began as an attempt to force Ottawa into a new deal has now exposed cracks in America's own economy. Factories are slowing down, prices are climbing, and key U.S. states that depend on Canadian energy and materials are feeling the strain. The October 7 meeting between Trump and Carney was meant to reset relations. It ended without a formal deal, yet it marked a quiet turning point. Canada did not yield. Instead, it used patience, economic leverage, and a sense of shared purpose to turn American pressure into a form of power.
Let's be clear about the relationship as it stands right now. We are the second largest trading partner of the United States. We do a lot of trade going across the border. Secondly, we are the largest foreign investor in the United States. $500 billion in the last 5 years alone, probably $8 trillion in the next 5 years if we get the agreement that we expect to get.
Canadian materials are deeply woven into American supply chains. Ontario steel goes into Michigan car frames. Quebec aluminum powers jet parts assembled in Ohio. When the tariffs hit, costs for those same American factories spiked overnight. Construction firms in Texas and Florida reported higher material prices by late summer 2025. Furniture producers in North Carolina warned of job cuts as imported wood components became too expensive to source. Meanwhile, Canadian exports slowed but did not collapse. Many firms shifted their shipments to Europe and Asia under existing trade pacts, while Ottawa cushioned affected sectors with targeted support. By September, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and several Great Lakes governors publicly urged Washington to reconsider. They argued that the tariffs were fueling inflation instead of reducing it. Inside Canada, the mood changed from frustration to resolve. The public saw that Trump's strategy was not breaking Ottawa's will, but exposing America's dependence on cross-border trade. The message became clear: the harder Washington squeezed, the more damage it caused to itself. Unlike the United Kingdom or the European Union, Canada cannot rely on distance to escape American policy shocks. The two nations share the world's longest undefended border, a 9,000-kilometer lifeline through which goods, energy, and investment flow every day. Carney reminded Americans of what that relationship means. Canada is their second-largest trading partner and their single largest foreign investor, with more than $500 billion invested over the past 5 years. If trade tensions ease, those investments could reach $8 trillion within the next 5 years, according to figures discussed by both governments. This level of integration gives Ottawa a different kind of strength. Ontario alone supplies electricity to states such as New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, helping to power factories, hospitals, and homes. When Trump's tariffs raised costs for those same regions, Canadian leaders quietly reminded local governors that their economic stability depends on cooperation, not confrontation. At the same time, Carney's government began shifting incentives toward domestic manufacturing. Companies producing steel and auto parts were encouraged to use off-peak electricity for cheaper power, effectively redirecting energy that once supported U.S. industry. The symbolism was striking. Canada could choose to keep the lights on south of the border or turn that current inward to strengthen its own factories. Trump wanted leverage, yet geography and integration meant Canada held most of it.
While Washington operated in crisis mode, Ottawa projected calm. Carney faced intense domestic pressure to strike a deal, but he resisted the urge to retaliate with sweeping counter-tariffs. Instead, he pulled back Canada's planned digital services tax, a gesture of goodwill that reopened dialogue. This approach contrasted sharply with the mood in the United States. The federal government remained partly shut down due to budget stalemates. Inflation was rising, and investors faced uncertainty over shifting tariff lists. By comparison, Canada's fiscal position was stable. International agencies kept the country's AAA credit rating. Its debt-to-GDP ratio remained the lowest in the G7, and the Bank of Canada maintained steady interest rates even as global markets wavered.
The contrast was not lost on financial analysts. Stability had become Canada's best diplomatic weapon. While Trump sought quick wins through public pressure, Carney built credibility quietly, aligning provincial premiers and business groups around a single goal: keep trade channels open and prevent panic. Even conservative figures who opposed Carney politically, such as former Minister Peter Mackay and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, acknowledged that the Prime Minister had to succeed for the sake of the national economy. The consensus was rare, and it strengthened Ottawa's hand. By the time the October meeting concluded, the US and Canada agreed to maintain technical talks and pause further escalation. No one declared victory, yet the silence itself spoke volumes. Carney had managed to turn confrontation into cooperation without conceding sovereignty.
At the heart of the standoff lies a truth both sides cannot escape. The two economies are built together. More than 60% of components used in American auto assembly plants originate in Canada, according to North American industry data. Quebec's aluminum and Ontario's steel remain critical inputs for U.S. aviation and construction. When Trump revived his 51st state remark, many Canadians saw it as an insult, but others recognized it as proof of how intertwined the two nations have become. Each tariff, each soundbite only underscored that separation would harm both. This reality reshaped the political landscape in the Great Lakes region. Governors from states like Michigan and Wisconsin, home to millions of workers tied to cross-border trade, openly opposed further tariffs. They called for cooperation on steel, autos, and energy rather than escalation. Canada's strategy was to highlight this shared dependency without turning it into a public feud. Through joint industrial meetings and energy briefings, Ottawa quietly reminded U.S. officials that integrated grids, pipelines, and manufacturing corridors cannot be rebuilt elsewhere without enormous cost. In effect, the North American supply chain itself became Canada's shield. Every car part crossing the Detroit-Windsor Bridge, every megawatt of power flowing south served as living evidence that partnership, not punishment, is the only sustainable model. Trump's tariffs may have been loud, but Canada's integration was louder in practice. When the second Trump-Carney meeting ended, there was no new trade deal to announce, yet Canada walked away stronger than before. It had protected its industries from escalation, rallied bipartisan support at home, and earned sympathy from governors, investors, and even segments of the American business community. The U.S. administration may still hold the tariff lever, but Canada controls something more durable: trust, consistency, and the quiet backing of economic facts. Trump's strategy to pressure Ottawa has instead revealed how dependent Washington remains on its northern neighbor. The story that began as a test of strength is turning into a lesson in interdependence. In the long run, tariffs can be lifted or replaced, but the networks of energy, labor, and investment that bind these two nations cannot be unmade. Trump wanted a headline victory. Carney aimed for endurance. And as the lights of the Great Lakes continue to glow on both sides of the border, it is clear whose approach is keeping them on.